I'm on the team at Divio, and in this session I'm going to take a Django project with a few applications in it, including Django CMS, and migrate it to the Divio Cloud. And I'm going to do that live in real time without the aid of a safety net or a script, so you'll just be along for the ride. Let's see how we get on. Let's start with the project that I want to migrate over. So let me start that up. I'm right here in the project now. So Python manage.py run server. And I will show you that there, it's started up now, and I'll show you the project here. So it has 1, 2, 3 pages. If you're familiar with Django CMS, then this is going to look pretty familiar to you. Let's just jump into edit mode. The username and password are admin and admin, but don't tell anyone that I told you that. So if you're familiar with Django CMS, then this will look pretty familiar to you, the placeholder and plugins view. But we don't need to worry about that too much. It's a site that includes the polls application that you're probably familiar with from the Django documentations tutorial. So we can say country or Western or both. Let me turn off the edit mode so you don't need to see the hover of the Django CMS in there. So there's a home page with some 1, 2, 3 plugins delivering polls into the page. We've got another page. Oh, by the way, we're using Bootstrap in this project. So this is Bootstrap 4. It's responsive. And the third page, sorry, is what we call in Django CMS an app-hooked page. It's got the polls application built into this page. So the page delivers the URLs of that application. But this is not really the most important part of what we're doing. That was just to give you a quick tour to show you the site and to show you that when we take actions here, the database updates and we can interact with it in the usual way. So let me show you what's happening in this project. Let me open it up in my text editor. Let's start with the settings. So we have in here a bunch of applications and their middleware and so on, some required settings. We've got Django CMS Bootstrap 4 installed, as I mentioned, and Django CMS and the various components that you need to install into the various applications that you need installed in a Django CMS project. Template settings, and of course the 2 applications that are custom applications for this. We've got the polls application handling the polls, and the polls CMS integration application that's the bit of glue between polls and Django CMS. So all of this, plus of course the static files for the styling and the templates and the database and the media files, they're all going to need to be migrated to Django CMS, to the Divio Cloud project. Actually, I should make this text a little larger for you so you can see it better. We have some requirements in here that are going to have to come over as well. So requirements for Django CMS and for the polls application and so on. And we're going to do all of that as part of this session. So I think we better go and first of all create a new blank Divio Cloud project that we're going to migrate this stuff into. So I'm doing this on the Divio Cloud control panel. We'll call this migration demo. And we can choose things like the deployment region. We have other regions as well which are available on application. We're going to use Python 3. This is a Django CMS project, so I'm going to let Divio Cloud set it up with this as a project type. As well as having other project types, we can have a completely blank Django project. But since this one has Django CMS in it anyway, I will start with that. And we can choose a boilerplate. A boilerplate is simply a front-end setup so that you can easily reuse complex front-end setups. In fact, the one we're going to be using is the blank one because our site already has its own Bootstrap front-end. And now we'll create the project. Now, what's happening here is that our project is being provisioned. And that means that we are wiring it all up ready for deployment. So we're preparing it, well, first of all, we're preparing it as a Git repository. So everything in a Divio Cloud project is in Git. As well as the Git repository for it, which is running on our local, our own Git server, we're going to set up its database. We have to set up its media storage on whichever region the site will be running on, and we have to set up the interface between our Django site and the web server, or the load balancers in our case. So this takes quite a long time here, about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. You can see the commit count going up here as the different actions are taking place in the back end. And it seems like a long time when you're waiting for it to happen and staring at the screen, but it's a lot shorter than it would ever take you usually to do it yourself, to provision a project ready for deployment, complete with the database. And oh, by the way, here we have not just one server, we have got two servers. We've got a test server and a live server. So the test server you can only see if you're actually logged into the control panel with the appropriate user, and the live server is available to everyone. So the way we normally work is that you will do your collaboration work with other members of your team on the test server, maybe share it with your client via the test server. We've got a link here that will give someone access even if they're not logged in. And then finally set it up on the live server with a real domain. And you can deploy at any time, and you can transfer data and media and so on and code between the live and test servers. Anyway, that's done now. What we need to do now is check that we've got the right things installed. And we're going to do this on the control panel. And you'll see later the effects that they have when we look at the project itself. So we're going to go to add-ons. We manage everything through what we call add-ons, and they're just our Divio Cloud way of packaging Python Django applications. And what we need to do here is check that the things that we had installed on the original project are also here. So one of them was Django CMS, which here is version 3.5, and I happen to know that that is in fact the version that we want, so that's okay. But we have Django CMS Bootstrap 4 in our project, version 1.0. So we'd better make sure that that's the right one and installed on the cloud. So let's go to all the public applications, add-ons, and we want, let's just do a search for Bootstrap. There it is, Django CMS Bootstrap 4. Let's install that. Now, this version is 1.1, and I want 1.0, so I'm going to change the version. And the reason for that is that the new version contains some fields that are not present in the old one, so my database wouldn't be able to import if I use the old one, if I use the new one. So there we are. We're now going to install version 1.0. Let's install. And this is going to make sure that the project has any middleware, static files, other applications listed in installed apps, all in the right order, because when you package an application for Divio Cloud, such as Django itself or Django CMS, or in this case Bootstrap 4, it can take care of its own configuration. And back here on the dashboard, you'll see that the commit count has increased because the act of installing an add-on or changing a version is in fact a Git commit. So I think that is all we actually need to do to get everything installed into the project. And I think what we need to do next is go to our local project and start working on it there. So as well as the test server here and the live server here, we have a local server, a local development environment that we will actually interact with. So let's go to the local development tab here. And I'm going to copy that. That's the command, Divio project setup, and then the slug of this project. I'm going to do this in the new terminal window. This pink one will be the one for our Divio Cloud project. So this is running locally on my machine. Let's get that started. We use Docker. That's why we have, or rather it's how we're able to have a test server and a live server running pretty much identical environments, and also the same thing locally. Here we are, to scroll up a bit. We're cloning the website locally, then we're running through the Docker files in there and building it. It's quite quick because we've done this. Docker's very clever. It caches a lot of things, so it's got some of this stuff cached already. It's running the build. Let's scroll down. That's all those static files, and that's actually done all that part. Now it's pulling down the database from the cloud into the local Docker environment. Give it a moment. It's running migrations on the database. This is what actually happens when you run a deployment on the cloud. It has to clone the repository, follow the instructions, the Docker instructions in it to build all the images, and then set everything running in the Docker containers. Okay, last few things done. Now it's pulling the media files down. There weren't any, of course, yet, and we're all ready to go. Marvelous. So we could have done this in our, let me refresh this. We could have done this in our Divio desktop application, which, as you can see, looks pretty familiar. It's got the same kind of interface as the control panel, and we can do things like the setup, which is the same command I ran on the in the command line. The reason I'm not using the Divio app now is not because the command line is better. It's just it's a bit more explicit about what's going on, and for the purposes of this demonstration, I think it's useful to show you things at the lowest level possible. But rest assured, you can interact with both the local environment and the cloud environment through the Divio desktop application, and it's very useful for people who aren't necessarily developers. So let's go into the new migration demo folder, and I'll give you a little tour of it. It's just a Django project, like any Django project, or nearly like any Django project that you'd be familiar with. So we've got our settings file. Now, do you remember I said that the add-ons can take care of their own settings? If we look at the settings of the original project, you'll see there's a lot of stuff in here. There's all the middleware that, as I mentioned, has to be in the right order, because if you get these things in the wrong order, then you can mess up your setup. We've got a lot of installed applications. So, for example, Django CMS Bootstrap has to install quite a number of items. In my Divio Cloud application, there's very little in there. And that's because the installed apps is managed by those add-ons. Of course, I can manipulate settings in here manually, but for the most part, it's much more reliable to let them be configured by the applications themselves. So, for example, we've got Django CMS Bootstrap add-on installed, and that has an aldrin_config file that installs all the right things into the right place. For Django CMS, the config file is substantially more complex because it can take care of a lot more things for us. So we can manage settings, we can pick up settings from environment variables here. It makes for a very repeatable and reliable way of configuring a project, because the last thing that you want to be doing for reliable project configuration is copying fragments from settings files to each other, because that's where things tend to go wrong. Good. Okay, we've got the project set up here. What we need to do is make sure that the Divio project has everything in it that the original project had. So I'm going to start with the requirements. Let's go and find the requirements here. So just to make things easy, I'm going to simply copy every single thing from requirements in the original project, and I'm going to drop them into the requirements of this one. Now, before we have a look at those, let me show you what's happening here. As you can see, This section is auto-generated by our control panel, and these are the URLs of the packages on our own PyPI server, and it's pulling in, for example, Aldrin Django, which is a wrapper for the Django application. And if I make a change on the control panel for a version, for example, if you remember, I set the version of Aldrin Bootstrap, that will be reflected here as well. So the things that are installed through our add-on system will be automatically listed here appropriately. So we don't need to worry about Django or Django CMS or Bootstrap, or indeed any of the other standard Django CMS components that we install by default, like Django CMS Google Map and or Django CMS Link and so on, or the CK editor. We just need to be concerned about the custom parts of it. So we don't need to worry about these because these are going to be installed anyway. So Django CMS, the Django CMS add-ons, the Django CMS, the Django dependencies of Django CMS, they too will all be in there, and so will the Python dependencies. The only thing I need to be concerned about is the polls application that was installed in the project. Here it was installed from its Git repository, which I can show you over here. So basically just using one of these URLs and putting it in the requirements file. This isn't actually the best way to do it because we haven't specified a tag or a commit here. So we're never going to be quite sure what version will be installed. We might get a version that has been updated on GitHub without our knowing in the meantime, or we might get a version that's a little bit old from our PyPI server, which caches this stuff. So what I'm going to do, instead of using that, which, as I said, is not really good practice, I'm going to take a version, the GitHub URL, specifying the precise commit that I want. And that's the safe way to do things. So let's save that. So that's our requirements file taken care of. That's the only extra thing that I need to install. Via pip, that is, because, don't forget, we had another application in here. Now this one's not installed by pip, this one's just been dropped into the project directory itself. So I'm going to simply pick that up and copy it over here. Drop that into the project. So that's how it was installed in the old one. We can install it in the new one in the same way. And now I think we're ready to build our project. So I will run docker-compose build web. And this means, well, let me show you the Docker Compose file very briefly. So here's the Docker Compose file. It describes the two services that are part of this project. We've got a web container and a DB container for the database. The web container is the one that holds our Django applications. So this is just a little bit of information about how Docker should set it all up. And I'm going to build this, and it's going to use our Docker file, which is here, to install, to construct it. The Docker file is instructions for constructing an image. But we don't need to worry about this because this is not really a Docker tutorial. I'm just going to go ahead and tell it to build the web container. It's done this already when I set up the project locally, but I've made some changes to the project by dropping in that extra application and by adding the requirement to requirements.in. So I need to run the build process again. And there you are, it's downloading the pip. It's pulling down the pip things that it needs, the Python packages. This shouldn't take too long. It's important that it runs through all of this install again, rather than simply installing the one single new dependency that I added. And that's because we want these builds to be absolutely repeatable. And if you just change things one bit at a time, then you never know whether it's going to be successful when you build the whole thing from scratch. And so, of course, it takes a few moments longer here, but it does mean that this process, if it completes successfully, then will also complete successfully when it's deployed for real on the cloud, for example. And in fact, that has built successfully. It did everything that it needed to do. What else did we do? Well, we've taken care of the requirements. We'd better have a look at the installed applications of the original project, because here are two things that weren't accounted for by any of the add-ons, our add-on system. So I'm going to have to put those in here manually. I'm going to have them added to the end of the installed apps list. And I think now with that we are ready to migrate our database, because I've got two new applications in the project. Sorry, there's two new applications in the project, so we better migrate the database. Now, normally we do Python manage.py migrate, and we're going to do exactly the same thing, of course, but this time we need to run it not on my local machine, but inside the Docker environment that's running on my local machine. So Docker compose run --rm web Python manage.py migrate. What this means here, run --rm web means run it in the web container, and then just delete the web container after doing this. And that's because the container is just holding the applications that run. It doesn't manage any state. It doesn't need to exist after I've finished doing an operation with it. All state of this website are contained in things like the database or the metadata, but not in the application containers themselves. And that's really important. It makes it possible, and it encourages us to build sites with very clear separations of concern. And it means that since the web containers don't contain any state, if I want to make my website able to handle more demand, I can just throw some more containers of the web application at it, because all they do is run the applications, and everything else that needs to be permanent, like the database or the media files, they're separate from that. So it makes scaling very easy. And it's one of the reasons why Docker and other containerization systems have become so popular. Anyway, let's run these migrations. We should have two applications to migrate. Yeah, 1 and 2. The polls application and the integration application that provides the glue with Django CMS. And that's done. And I think, oh, there's one more thing we need to do. One setting that's not in our file here. Let's go over to settings here to pick it up. And that's the Django CMS templates setting. Now, ultimately, we'll do this in a slightly different way when I push it to the Cloud for Real deployment. But for now, I'm just going to put that setting into there so that it will run locally. Let's make sure that's saved, and that's good. And now I'm ready to start transferring the content from the original project to the new one. Here in the original project, no, not there. Here in the original project, I've got a database.json file containing everything that was in the website that we looked at when we were looking at it over here. So that is going to have to be imported into the new one. So let me just grab that file, and I'm simply going to drop it there so I've got access to it here in the root of my new project. And now we're going to do, again, a docker-compose run --rm web, and this time it will be python manage.py load data, and it's database.json. Okay, and if I've got everything right, the database schema will be ready to accept this, so let's try it. And it's got about 680 or so objects to load from that fixture. So this was just exported with a manage.py dump data command earlier. Great, there we are, installed 682 objects successfully. A few more things we need to get over. We need to get over the, sorry, wrong window again. We need to get over the templates for the site. So we've got the base template and a content template, so let's pick those up. And templates live down there, so let's copy those into there. I don't think I succeeded. Let me try that again. I think I let go at the wrong moment. Templates into there. Good. There they are. The templates are now in the right place. And we need the static files. So let's go and grab the static files from the original. Here we are, CSS. Try again. CSS, image, JSON, and vendor. Pick those up. And the static directory is there, and copy those in there too. And finally, the media files. So let's go and pick those up. Media, pick it up, and media go into the data directory over there. Great, so everything is now in place. And I'm pretty sure I've done everything correctly, so let's run docker compose up, and this is going to start up the whole project. Great, okay, so now we have a run server actually running. Let's go to the localhost, let's refresh that. This is, looks like I did not copy the templates into the right place, so let me just stop that again. This is how you know it really is a live session. So let's go and have a look at the templates. 1, 2, 3. Pick those up, and let's go down to templates. In fact, I can see that they're missing there. That's better. Now we do have. Oh, I copied the wrong thing, didn't I? Okay, that's what happens when you're doing live. Doing things live. Let's run docker compose up again. Oh, by the way, you can see that the Docker container is still giving me the console just as an ordinary Django project would. And let's refresh that. It's not working yet. Yeah, here we are. So it's the same site now, just as before, same functionality. It looks exactly the same, as indeed it should, and works in exactly the same way. And just to prove to you, by the way, that it really is the Divio Cloud Dockerized site running, look, there we've got our Divio single sign-on, so rather than the ordinary Django sign-on. So the project's now running locally. It's doing all the things it needs to do. I could test it a little bit more. In fact, I probably would in a real case, but I don't need to do that right now. I feel ready to push it to the cloud. So let's get it ready for that. Ah, okay. I said that this was only temporary, that I was going to put that there. So I'm going to take that out of there. This is one of the things that can be managed through the add-on configuration in the control panel. So I'm going to remove that from there, which of course would stop it from working there. And here in my project, I'm going to go to add-ons, and I'll show you some of the Django CMS configuration that's available. Let's order in Django CMS, there it is, configure. So you can see some of these settings that we expose in as in the form. And this needs to be, now let me get this right, it's going to be content.html, and then the name that we expose to the user in the Django CMS interface is content, and that looks right. So it's a nested list of templates. Good, that looks correct to me. So if I hit save here, this of course is going to be yet another commit in our project. And we go back to the dashboard for the project. We should see there's another commit there. Good. Now I feel ready to push my project up. So let's have a look at the Git status of this project. Okay, we've got some various things changed. So we better just add some things. So let's add the requirements, and we need to add, that's because we've got the polls application and requirements. In settings, the only change that I made was the two polls related applications. I want to add the polls application that's now in the project itself. I want to add all the static files, and I want to add all the templates. Let's do a git commit, and I will say migrated project to Divio Cloud. Good, there's my commit. Now before I can push it, I better do a git pull because I just made a change on the cloud, if you remember, when I changed the Django CMS settings. So let's pull those down. It's probably going to, yes, it wants to do a merge, so that's fine. And now I can do a git push, and let's be good and do make it explicit. Git push origin develop. Always good practice. Make sure you push things to the right place, because plenty of people, including me, have had nasty surprises pushing things in Git to the wrong place. So this is going to take a few moments. Let's see this here. In a moment, when that starts actually uploading, you will see that the number of commits jumps, because the commit that I'm pushing from here is going to land on the Git server on the cloud. Give that a moment. It's still, I think it's still preparing things. Okay, that's done. There you are. That jumped from 28 to 30. And now I think we are in fact ready to deploy. So, oh no, we're not. Of course, we're not ready to deploy, because I've still got to push three more things. I'd better push up the database, so I will do Divio project push db. And by the way, again, of course, this is something that you could equally well do in the Divio application. You can upload database and media as well as code, but I'm going to do it here on the command line. Yes, I want to overwrite the database on the cloud, so it's pushing that up. And if I take you over, oh, this sometimes happens. It's just one of those little things. Let's just do the same command again. We'll ignore that. Yes, I do want to overwrite the database on the cloud. And what you'll see happening here in a moment is that this is going to be using our backup system. There you are, restoring backup, because that's how we push and pull material to and from the cloud. You can see that the cloud knows that we're conducting an operation from the desktop, from the command line, and even the Divio app is connected to the same API. So these things are all in synchronization with each other. And that's done. Great. Let's push the media files. Divio project push db. Sorry, not db, media. And I'm pushing these to the test server. If I added live to that command, I could push them directly to the live server, which you might do when you're living dangerously, but normally I'd always recommend to push things to the test server and then from test to live. So that's the those are the media files going up. Great, and that's done. So now we could actually deploy from the desktop application, from the control panel, but I like to do it here. Divio project deploy, and this is the moment of truth. And once again, we're connecting to our API, and you can see the deployment's running here. The deployment should generally take less than 2 minutes, depending on how much load there is on our system, or sometimes how complex your project is, because if it has, for example, a lot of front-end building or Python installation to do, it can take a bit longer, but this looks like it's going to be quite a quick one. So it's now building the Docker image. Let me just move this over so you can see that progressing there. And we've actually seen this process when I ran the build locally before. It's pretty much the same thing. The first time I set it up, it was doing this too. Great, we're nearly there. Now it's running the migrations that perhaps you remember those from earlier. And in a moment, this is going to turn green. And as soon as it turns green, I think it'll be less than 1 minute 15 seconds at this rate, it's actually ready to use the site. So we'll just hang on for that. Oh, there we are within 1 minute 15 seconds. So here we are. Let's press that. And here we are on our stage server on the cloud. We'll hit that because I'm already signed in. So that's the single sign-on. And there's a project ready to use, ready to edit if I wanted to. And that's the whole process from a Django application, a Django project running locally, to getting it deployed for real on the cloud. You wouldn't be able to use this URL to look at this project because it's private to me only. You'd have to be using an account that has access to it. But I could copy this URL here, and let me just open a new tab for that one, and share that. You can see the hash in there, and that means that anybody else, if I wanted to share it with a client, they could use it. And just to finish the demo, I'm actually going to deploy it for real on live. And off it goes, deploying onto the live server. And that will be available to anyone. That will no longer be private. And if I wanted to host it under my own domain, I just add the domain in here. And as soon as the domain is ready, that would be available on under that domain, served up from our cloud platform. So that's really all I wanted to show you. We've got a tutorial where you can do exactly the steps that I have followed here. So if you go to our documentation at docs.divio.com, in our tutorials, you will find in the 2 standalone tutorials, one to migrate a project to Divio Cloud. And that takes you through all the steps I've done today, as well as some additional steps to set up that project locally in the first place. So you can just pull it down from Git and run a few commands and it will be ready to go. And then you'll be able to do the actual process of the migration. And it's worth following the tutorial because it gives you practice for doing it in real life and gives you a feel for the kind of workflow that you go through. And the advantage of working from a tutorial rather than doing it on your own project for the first time is that you know this ought to work, you've seen me do it, and you know you're going to have success at the end. And so that can save you some frustration. You do need a little bit of Divio Cloud knowledge to do this. So if you've not done anything like that before, I suggest you'd start with our introductory tutorials and maybe do the first 2 or perhaps 4 tutorials, and they'll give you everything you need, all the commands. Everything in here is extremely well documented. Even in the tutorial, there are links to other parts of the documentation. If you want a more generic how-to guide for migration, then we've got one, how to migrate an existing project to Divio Cloud. But of course, this assumes quite a bit more familiarity. If you haven't done one before, I'd certainly recommend starting right there. So let me just go and check my deployment. Yes, that's deployed live and for real. Of course, it's still only on. It hasn't got. I didn't copy the data from the test database, so I should have done that. But I could do it equally well from here. I could do Divio project push db to live, but I'll do that. Copy data from test and deploy. So yes, we're going to overwrite live for the data from test. That's because you wouldn't necessarily want to overwrite the live data. You might just want to update the code. So anyway, I won't make you wait for that to happen, even though, as you saw, it's only going to take another 56 or so seconds. I'll leave you with the link of the documentation. So it's docs.divio.com, and find Migrate project in the tutorials. Once you're trying this, don't forget that we're on Intercom. In fact, I'm on there along with my colleagues, and we're always able to help you. So just if you run into any troubles, don't hesitate to drop us a line. Thank you very much. Would be really interested to have your feedback on this, and let us know if you have any successes with it. Thanks then, and bye-bye.